Now, today our guest is Howard Beck. Howard has covered the NBA for 18 years for the New York Times, Los Angeles Daily News, and is currently a senior writer for Bleacher Report. Howard, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Howard, last week you came out with that article, Brotherhood, about the relationship between Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James and kind of their evolution through the league. You kind of alluded to the fact that Melo has always chosen the money over, where might be the best place to win. Would you say Melo lacks kind of the same competitive edge that a guy like LeBron James has or Dwayne Wade?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would just say that, he made certain choices that, in my estimation, and frankly, in the estimation of a lot of people around the league who have watched him over the years, that were financially driven. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't point it out to be judgmental about it. It's just that, Carmelo has consistently made some decisions that, while they made sense business-wise, while they made sense in terms of long-term security, while there was, good rationale for them, they have unfortunately put him in worse positions competitively. Forcing the trade from Denver to New York meant that the Knicks lost a lot of very viable players, starters, draft picks, doing it because he wanted to get an extension locked in before a lockout, before a new labor deal that might have curtailed his earnings. That's financially driven as well, and so that's why he forces the trade instead of waiting for free agency. And so did that hurt him competitively? Yeah, of course it did. And he even, a couple of years later, actually acknowledged that the trade itself cost the Knicks a lot of good players, and that it was going to take time to refill the talent around him. So he's probably not thinking that at the time, though, to be honest. I mean, in 2011, when he's decided, okay, I've had enough in Denver, but I've got another, a year to go unless I opt out or I force a trade, and he's weighing all these options, and he's looking for an extension that he wants to lock in before the lockout. Those are the things that you have to weigh. And, if anything, I would maybe blame his advisors, his representatives who probably could have counseled him better to say, look, the money is certainly important and everybody should maximize their earnings while they're in this league because NBA careers are relatively short. But if you do it this way, you're going to hurt the talent level of the roster that you're going to. And it may set you back competitively. That's a discussion. I don't know if they had it, to be honest, but that's a discussion I think you have to have before you make a decision like that. And then, you can look at other decisions since then. Staying in New York for near max money a couple summers ago, when he had the option to go to Houston or Chicago or LA, none of them could have paid him as much because that's just the way the NBA is set up. But, at least in Chicago and Houston, he certainly had a chance to win at a higher level, maybe even contend for a title. And again, I'm not judging it. I'm not saying he traded the money for, traded wins for money. I'm just saying he made a decision that was, I think, at least partly financially driven. I think there's some loyalty to New York too. But he certainly did, again, choose an option that involved more money and involved less of a viable path to the NBA Finals. So I don't think that makes him, to your question, I don't think that makes him less competitive. I just think he's prioritized long-term security at every juncture, and maybe he hasn't fully thought through where that left him competitively. I think he wants to win a championship. I think he wants to compete at the highest level. But he hasn't been willing to this point to make some sacrifices that might have gotten him there a little sooner.
Yeah, that's a good point, Howard, because those sacrifices. And while he was on Denver, he wasn't really in the best situation. I know him and George Karl didn't get along, so I always really gave him the benefit of the doubt. But I like that you referenced a few summers ago how he stayed in New York for the money, and I think he also likes that New York atmosphere, the whole metropolitan area, all
he
that.
Does.
And then instead, I really thought that he was going to leave. I thought he was going to go to Chicago, which was my personal best fit for him. I know he was visiting a lot of other teams, weighing his options. And I also wanted to touch on this because you said that he doesn't lack that competitive edge. He's also just made decisions in his financial best interest. And when he was on the Nuggets from 2003 to 2011, he made it out of the first round, I think, once in that 2009 run with Chauncey Billups, that team. That was a great team. But besides that, never really made it out of the first round. And do you blame that on his relationship with George Karl in Denver? Or do you just put that all on Carmelo Anthony, or that he didn't have enough talent around him? Because because of that, yeah.
No, I don't think it was the relationship with George Karl. I think that if you want to go to where the root of their concerns were, at least George Karl's concerns with Carmelo, George Karl was always trying to get Carmelo to come in better shape, to play a little more defense, to move the ball a little more. The same things that basically you've heard from every coach he's had. And so, those things aren't new. Now, when you're a superstar, when you're a max player, when you're the franchise face, these things are expected of you. You're going to have higher demands placed on you. You're going to have higher expectations. And so I don't think George Karl was asking anything of him that was unusual or unreasonable. George has a way of sometimes doing these things in a ways that can irritate his stars.
I mean, take
George,
a look at DeMarcus Cousins as well. That definitely has not been working out as much, too.
Yeah. Now, that said, DeMarcus Cousins is an extreme case. Because
yes, absolutely.
There are almost no coaches on earth, I think, who can connect with DeMarcus Cousins. And the one they had, they chased off. They fired. No, but George had a history of this going, back through almost every stop, and certainly famously with Gary Payton in Seattle. So, George's message, his demands on Carmelo were the right thing. The way he delivered them might have been wrong, and maybe there was no right way. I mean, Mike D'Antoni tried to get Carmelo to play more of a team game, and couldn't get through to him either, and had to leave New York as a result as well. So, some of these things are on Carmelo, but when you ask about, okay, he only made it out of the first round once in Denver all those years. Some of that you could say is on Carmelo. It's always fair to put it on the superstar because they're supposed to elevate their teammates. They're supposed to make everyone around them better. And I think there are legitimate questions over the years about whether Carmelo has really elevated his teammates. But to the point that I touched on at times in my story last week, you also have to just look at his makeup. He's a scorer first. It's not that he can't be a playmaker. It's just that that's not his forte. It's not what has defined him. And so to an extent, you can demand, hey, look, Carmelo, pass the ball more. As he's doing this year, he's showing he's fully capable of being a better assist guy. But if you're the team that has Carmelo Anthony and you recognize that, look, this guy is a phenomenal scorer, but we may not be able to rely on him for certain other things, then you find the guys to get around him to do those things. That's your responsibility as an organization. So Carmelo bears some of the responsibility, and the Denver Nuggets, I think, in that time, bore some responsibility. And look at who he had around him. I mean, there was never a true second star. They got a late career Allen Iverson who, is a ball dominator and inefficient scorer, beyond Carmelo. I mean, people, talk about Carmelo's, ball dominating and low efficiency. I mean, Iverson, was, the king of that. So Carmelo and Iverson together wasn't a great combination, and it was late career Iverson. Chauncey was a phenomenal player to have next to Carmelo as a leader, as a point guard, as a distributor. And they got to the conference finals. They lost to the Lakers. The Lakers won the championship. That was a tough team. I think they took them to 6 games.
They absolutely did. And I think that's right. He needs a better team around him. He needs a few guys that can't just do it by himself. He's not as much of a dominating player for his team as LeBron was. And you look at the two most successful teams with Carmelo Anthony. I'm talking season-wise, 08-09, that Nuggets team with what you mentioned. They had J.R. Smith, Chauncey Billups. I think they had Nene inside. They had a lot of depth, and it just really clicked that year more, and getting rid of Iverson, really expanding things. And also that 2012-13 team where they had a lot of Knicks team, where they had a lot of veteran leadership with Jason Kidd. Yep. They had Tyson Chandler just coming off a title. So I think Melo revolved around, if he's with guys who are veteran guys in this league, know how to win, can score, but aren't going to want to take too many possessions, too many touches away from him, that'll really make him strive. And I agree with you. I think it was a fault at both sides with Karl and with Melo as well.
Yeah, and look, this is the thing. I've been, the time that I've been in New York, and obviously I covered the Knicks for several years for the Times, I've been critical of Carmelo, and I stand by that criticism. I think he could be more. It's not criticism because out of dislike or lack of respect for who he is or what he's done. I mean, I like Carmelo a lot as a person. He's a phenomenal player. I just think that there could be more there. He has the capability to do more, and we're seeing that right now, frankly. He is doing more. But you also have to recognize that when you have him, the job of an organization is to bring out the best in the guys you have, or to exploit their best talents, but recognize where the deficiencies might be, and if you can, get them to patch up those deficiencies. If you can get them to pass more, great. If you can't, then you either move on from him or you find the guys who bring out his best. And they, as you point out, they did it the one year in New York where Jason Kidd and Rasheed Wallace, who were two phenomenal influences on Carmelo, because they got him. That was one of his best seasons in terms of not stopping the ball, not stopping the offense, keeping it moving, and he was a more efficient player that year. So was J.R. Smith. J.R. Smith that the year he goes sixth man of the year, had his best season because Jason Kidd, Rasheed Wallace, Kurt Thomas kept those guys on the straight and narrow, made them a better version of themselves. And Carmelo needs that to an extent. He's not necessarily going to be the vocal leader type. He's not going to be the one to set the tone. He kind of needs somebody else to do it in that locker room. And so, again, if we want to start making comparisons, okay, stand him up next to, LeBron, as I touched on in the story, or some other people, and you might say, well, he falls short. Well, it's not who he is. We can't demand that Carmelo be somebody other than who he is. And it doesn't diminish his greatness. It just means that, that you got to recognize where the strengths are and where the limitations are.
I just want to move on and talk about LeBron James. You were talking about in your article, but I just want to talk about the past couple weeks and kind of the scrutiny that he's been under. And he's the most marketable player in the NBA, arguably the best player in the NBA. He has a scope on him. But do you think that he brings some of this attention on himself, and would you consider it a distraction to his team?
He does bring a lot of it on himself. I think most of that's intentional. I think some of it's unintentional. I mean, the whole unfollow gate, unfollowing the Cavs account and all that, was a really silly story. I mean, the times that we live in, it has to be a story because everything's a story at this point. But I'm not convinced that LeBron James knew that anybody would realize he unfollowed the Cavs account. I didn't know that these sites existed that you could clue you in as soon as somebody unfollowed. And I'm frankly I shouldn't be surprised at this point, but I'm a little surprised that anybody's out there waiting to see who LeBron or anybody else unfollowed so that they can have that gotcha moment. But somebody did, but I'm not convinced that LeBron did that with the thought that, someone will see it and then it'll be a story. That was one where I think he unintentionally brought attention. Yucking it up with Dwayne Wade at halftime of a game that the Cavs are getting their butts kicked, probably not a good look. And that was one that, the coach, Tyronn Lue, talked to him about later. Some things that were said, on social media, some cryptic quotes and everything. Sometimes he's sending subtle messages. Sometimes maybe he's just messing with everybody. I don't think most of these things are necessarily negative. It just depends on how it's received in the locker room. And in general, LeBron's been a pretty strong leader. He, can be a little passive-aggressive at times. He can get, he's got such high standards. He plays the game and thinks the game at such a high level that I think sometimes it's hard for him, just as it was hard. I mean, different guys, but I covered Kobe for years, and Kobe's that same thing. Like, his demands for himself, his standards for himself are so ridiculously high that it's hard to accept anybody around him who's not going to work as hard or be as smart about the game, be as diligent. That's, was the root of a lot of Shaq and Kobe's problems, frankly, because Kobe was just a more dedicated, he was more dedicated to the game. And LeBron, I think, has a similar kind of, not intolerance, I think he's better about relating to guys regardless of that gap between him and them. But he has his moments. We've seen some of those exasperated moments, and we've heard some of the quotes. So it's a fine line he walks. But, on balance, I think, he does a pretty good job of leading that team.
Yeah, no, I think he does a great job of leading that team. And a lot of people question a lot of the recent social media stunts and all of the saying how he wants to play with his friends in Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul and Melo, all these little stunts in these interviews where he just walks away, creating a lot of controversy, and he's trying to stay focused. I really think that he needs to just get all as much of the attention that he can and it's tough for him to do so since he's LeBron James and regarded as the best player in the NBA, just to try to just keep him off the radar as much as he can, just so he can stay focused and even try to bring a championship to Cleveland, which brings me to my next point. If the Cavs lose this year in the NBA Finals badly again, if they end up playing, because they're most likely going to be there again, if not definitely, if they end up playing either the Spurs, Warriors, even the Thunder, and they end up losing badly, do you think that he could leave Cleveland again and essentially like begin another championship curse in Cleveland? Do you see LeBron blowing up all of the social media networks again?
He's not leaving Cleveland again. I mean, something extreme would have to happen, and it's not just a loss. It's not going to be losing that would drive him from Cleveland. There would have to be some sort of, franchise betrayal that he felt, or they would have had to seriously fail him in some regard. They've done everything he's wanted since he returned, and besides that, LeBron didn't return to Cleveland saying, "I'm coming back to Cleveland because I like the lineup." He says, "I'm coming back to Cleveland because I want to win a championship for Cleveland, for Northeast Ohio. I want to uplift this region." He made it into a cause. He made it into something that was bigger than basketball. He's used that phrase, I believe, bigger than basketball. So when you make that decision, when you make it with that kind of emotion and sentiment attached to it, I think you kind of eliminate the possibility of leaving, because at that point you basically, I mean, the betrayal on his part would just be 10 times what it was when he left in 2010. In 2010, he was fully justified in leaving. I defended it at the time. I've defended it every day since, that the Cavaliers couldn't get him the right surrounding cast to try to win a championship, so he had to go find a better one, and he did, and he won 2 championships. And when he returned, there was a combination of factors, but he listed at the top of it, wanting to go home basically and uplift the region that he's called home. So I don't think there's I think he's really hemmed himself in. I don't think that there's a plausible reason to leave. And besides that, basketball-wise, they have done what they've needed to do. They got to the finals in year 1 of his return with a lineup that was completely new to each other. If they fall short this year, and they're probably going to, they'll probably be in the finals again, and they'll probably lose again. The consequences aren't going to be LeBron leaving. That big 3 has a clock ticking on it, but he's not the one going. They're either trading Love or trading Kyrie Irving, or maybe even both of them. The biggest problem they have right now is that the chemistry between those 3, any 2 of them, it's been okay. All 3 of them has not worked. It hasn't functioned at the level that you want from a big 3. They're not the same. They don't have that same, chemistry and that same prowess that LeBron, Wade, and Bosh had, or that Pierce and Garnett and Ray Allen had. They just don't have it, and I don't know that they're going to get it. And so I do believe we're going to see dramatic change for the Cavaliers this offseason, but it's not LeBron leaving. So
so it brings full circle. Is that change going to be going out and trying to get, Carmelo Anthony, like you alluded to in your article?
Well, no. I mean, look, to put LeBron's quote in context, at that point, we've been talking for a half hour about LeBron and Carmelo, about their friendship, about this deep bond they've shared, and about the fact that since age 17, since the first time they saw each other and met and played against each other and were in a camp with each other, they said, "Man, I want to play with that guy." They each said this about the other guy, and you could see where they'd actually be a phenomenal fit together. Especially in today's NBA, 2 interchangeable forwards who could, play both positions offensively and defensively in the front court. I mean, they'd be fantastic together, and they've been great together in the Olympics. But we've been talking for a half hour at this point, LeBron and I, about that friendship and about the fact they always wanted to play together, and about the fact that Carmelo made these decisions that cut off that possibility in the NBA. And so I'm putting that back to LeBron about, do you think that Carmelo kind of regrets that? And LeBron, instead of just saying, "Yeah, I'd like to play with him still," takes it to the next level and says, "I'd like to play with him and Chris and Dwayne Wade." But he's thinking out loud. He's fantasizing out loud. He's talking about, 4 friends who are all future Hall of Famers who, obviously, playing together would just be so much fun for them. There's a mutual respect and a trust. And that's the context of it. I don't think he was saying it as like, "Oh, this is a plan." And yeah, he did say I'd take a pay cut to do it, and we'll see, and all that kind of stuff. But I think he knows that it's probably not very realistic. If it happens, it's probably still a couple years down the road when these guys are starting to hit their twilight. I don't know how much time is left for it, frankly, because Dwayne Wade looks like he's getting close to the end. He's played pretty well this year, though. So we'll see. I mean, I think if there's any two of them, Wade and LeBron have played together already. If there's any two of them that I still think will end up somehow getting together or could, it would be LeBron and Carmelo. I think those guys have a really strong desire to do it, to find a way. But LeBron's not going to, jump from Cleveland to New York in free agency this summer. I think that's pretty far-fetched. The Knicks at this point, I don't see necessarily trading Carmelo, and he has a no-trade clause, so he's going to have to go to them. Is he going to go to them and say, trade me to Cleveland? As much as he loves New York, that's kind of hard to see. And that's the thing. All these guys, they like where they are. Dwayne Wade wants to be a Heat lifer. He's been there his entire career. LeBron, I don't think can leave Cleveland again, as I mentioned. Carmelo, I don't think really wants to leave New York unless things get really desperate or things, unless he thinks things are really bleak. And we won't know that until we see what they do in free agency this summer. So I think this is still more in the realm of fantasy than anything else in terms of these guys getting together, but we'll see.
A lot of great points there. Howard, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate all your insight. And then, again, great article last week about Melo and LeBron. Thanks so much. And there's a playoff starting soon. It's going to be interesting. Howard, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.